Welcome to the final power rankings in the new house. It's funny on Discord. Apparently, the conversation's been, "Hey, this is the last hockey guy power rankings. What's your favorite memory from the house? Your favorite memory from the power rankings?" um, for me, sentimental value isn't attached to the house. I'm excited about where we're headed. I'm excited about where the channel's headed, and I'm excited about the idea that the vision that I've had for this channel from day one, back to when I'm sitting on a blue love seat in my living room just talking hockey for 50 views per video. I always had a vision for how I wanted it to look, and I think this coming week we're finally going to see it. I've ordered some more studio lights. It's going to look good, and I'm excited about it. So while, yes, it's kind of a solemn occasion, and knowing that the set's been all taken apart, racks are taken apart and all that stuff, there's a better future ahead, and there's always more jerseys. I know my collection's complete. Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, it's done. Let's get to this week's power rankings. Number 31, dropping 2 spots from last week, the the Ottawa Senators. So Dzingel and Duchesne leave, and I don't drop them for that reason. I drop them because they're not really looking like an NHL team right now. Clearly, Eugene Melnyk meant what he said about, the rebuild and the patience and the spending money later, because it looks like when Dzingel and Duchesne are gone, it looks like Stone could be on his way out too. That they may be looking to make one last push. And honestly, Ottawa needs that. They need at least one star player they can say, hey, we're building around this guy. And they won't have that. At least, and I mean a veteran, not just like Brady Tkachuk. You don't want to just throw Brady Tkachuk out there and go, hey, look, this is our future. He's just a kid. Like, that's just crazy. Number 30, dropping 3 spots from last week. The selling Detroit Red Wings. This is a spot where we kind of expected them to end up. Detroit on the road downward. But, I feel like their future's not too bad. I think when you look at where the team is right now, you look compared to where it was last year, I think they're further along in their rebuild, and I think that there's a bright future there. I know there's some Detroit fans that don't necessarily see it, but I do. So with Detroit and Ottawa being down here, the question becomes, how high did Anaheim climb this week? How great are the heights? Yeah, they're at 29. Can I say? Anaheim looked like they were climbing out. I was ready to bring them right out of that bottom row. And then they started falling again. Goaltending, though, was never really the issue for Anaheim. So while Ryan Miller's return seemed to help, and there was a bit of a spark with Corey Perry, that really looks like it was brief. So for Anaheim, they're into better luck next year category again. After looking like they might be able to dig their way out, they're back down again. The loss to Edmonton really hurt them tonight. Speaking of which, at 28, it's Edmonton. The Oilers, it's really weird, isn't it, that when they don't have McDavid, they can still win a game? And I say that because I remember back in the 80s, the Oilers couldn't win without Gretzky. It just wasn't a thing. If Gretzky got hurt, the Oilers couldn't win. And it's not that McDavid isn't a great player. McDavid is absolutely, arguably, the greatest player in the game. Arguably. I say that because we argue about it all the time. But when he's out, it definitely changes the roles of players. It forces Draisaitl to be the main guy. And the Oilers this week have at least shown some signs of life. Not a ton, but some. Number 27, moving up 1 spot, is New Jersey, because Detroit was that bad this week. That's really what it is. It's not a matter of New Jersey having a great week. There is one team that had a great week. There is one team that made a huge jump on the board this week. Outside of that, there's minor drops, minor rises. There's one team that had an amazing week. Now, New Jersey, not a great week, but still, they're ahead of these 4. Number 26, dropping 1 spot from last week, is Vancouver. The lack of experience in scoring is an issue. Their goaltending's been very good. Their defense, very beat up, very battered. And it's a matter of, I think the Canucks are a year out from being in the playoffs. I do believe they make it next year. They've made enough progress this year. I think they can make it next year, but It's just not in the cards this year, and I'm fine with that. That doesn't bother me in the slightest. Never has. Number 25, dropping 3 spots from last week, the Kings. The Kings are kind of playing out the string too. They do get the occasional victory, and when they're losing games well, for lack of a better way of putting it. They're not getting blown out 6-1, 7-1 most nights. Today was one of those times where they do lose 6-1, so that definitely didn't help them in the standing. But they've been playing relatively well in most of those losses, so I have to give them some credit there. And it'll be interesting to see what the Kings do on Monday. Number 24, staying in the same spot as last week, is Arizona. Arizona, decent run through Western Canada this week. I still get the feeling like they probably don't make it in the West because of the way that a couple of teams have picked it up lately. But they've put up a good fight here. They're not completely out of it. They could still end up getting in. We'll see what they do. But for right now, I have them staying in the same spot at 24. At 23, dropping 3 spots from last week, is Dallas. Adding Matt Zuccarello will help. It'll help their offense. May help with some leadership in the locker room. It won't just be on that big 3 line anymore. Now you've got somebody else in there. There's been a lot of depth problems with Dallas, and maybe this fixes it. But the results right now for me have them at 23. At 22, down 1 spot from last week, Minnesota. Now, they won back-to-back games this week, which is great. They won them over 2 lesser light teams in Detroit and in the New York Rangers. So, I'm mildly encouraged with Minnesota right now, but I want to see more of it. And up until those back-to-back wins, it had been a disaster for Minnesota. So that's why they are where they are. Number 21, moving up 2 spots from last week, is Florida. I'm trying really hard not to pay too much attention to what Florida's doing, even though it's interesting. They've won a few games in a row now, and they look like maybe they're interested in being in the playoff race. They're not making the playoffs, but they at least want to make it so that at the end of the year you talk about how, well, Florida was only 5 points out, so they could get in next year. Look at these pieces they've added. I'm not falling for it again, Florida. It's not happening. Number 20, moving up 1 spot from last week, the inconsistent and underachieving Buffalo Sabres, who won today, which helped them a lot, because they were in for a big nosedive this week. They probably would have been 22 if they'd gotten beaten by Washington. Florida then would have been up to 20, and I still wouldn't have believed. But for me, Buffalo, it's been a long, slow, painfully slow drop for them. But they're sitting right now in a spot where they're not going to make the playoffs. Number 19, and this is a team that surprises me. Down 3 spots from last week, I've got Vegas. And I would be very surprised if most power rankings don't have Vegas still in the top 16. And here's why. They're still 3rd in their division, and they're 3rd with a good cushion. So you look at the overall standings, and you say, oh, well, Vegas is still in there, so Vegas is still playing well. We'll still have them in our top 16. Or you may go, well, they're not playing very well, but they're still a playoff team, so, they haven't really had any pressure, so I can't let them off the hook with it. All right, I can't kneel anymore. I've got to sit on the floor rather than kneel. Everything you would sit on in this house is gone except the chair that I have the computer resting on. So there you go. The low tech setup for the hockey guy tonight, as low tech as I've ever been. Anyways, so I have Vegas at 19th, and it pains me to put them in 19th, but honestly, they just haven't been playing very well for the most part. The game against Winnipeg, that shouldn't happen at home. Shouldn't happen at home. And their record, they've lost 7 of 9 at home. It's stunning. And they're not great on the road either. So that's part of it as well. Number 18, same spot as last week. Rangers. The Rangers won't be there next week. I would be very surprised if after the trade deadline, the Rangers don't do exactly what the Rangers did last year, which was nosedive. Matt Zuccarello, gets traded tonight to Dallas, and he was rumored to be on his way out of New York at last trade deadline. And then he was rumored to be on his way out of New York during the summer. And now it's finally happened. So eventually the pundits are right. You throw that rumor out there long enough, eventually you're right. But the Rangers, they likely are moving other guys. McQuaid's one that's been talked about a lot. Hayes as well. So odds are next week they probably fall. Unless they bring up kids who overachieve, which sometimes happens. Number 17, dropping 2 points from last week. You know, I'm really honestly surprised that Pittsburgh's this low. I am shocked that Pittsburgh comes in this low. And yet, you look at the loss to Philly tonight, and you don't see it as a loss to Philly and go, well, they lost to Philly, that proves that they suck or anything, because Philly's been on a really decent run, just they went on the run too late. Same thing Florida did last year. But it's how they're losing these games that has me concerned, and has me thinking that Jim Rutherford at the deadline is still going to be looking for something else. And I don't know if it's going to be depth up front, blue line, or both. But they're definitely going to be doing more at the deadline. Because I can't see this team staying this way, because right now they're flirting with missing the playoffs. You know what? We would have looked at 2 weeks ago and said, well, they're not going to miss. They could. Carolina's run means they absolutely could. They very well may end up being the team that misses the playoffs in the East. Number 16, jumping 10 spots from last week. Now remember, I don't do my rankings the same as I used to. So you don't see, move up a couple of spots, drop a couple of spots, move up. No, I just look at which teams are playing well. So this is one of those things that when I was looking at last week's rankings, and I don't look at the rankings during the week. Like I don't go, well, where were they on Saturday, and then move them accordingly. I just move them every day according to who I think's playing the best. Colorado has been on an amazing run, and their goaltending has been fixed seemingly overnight. Their defensive issues seem to be getting a lot better. The depth scoring is there now. Everything that I said that they were missing in the video I did on Colorado falling apart, it's all come together. So for right now, I have them in 16th on the power rankings. I think they're playing very, very well. They did jump past Minnesota. I think they're overall playing better than Minnesota. We'll see what happens next week. If Ryan Donato's 3 assists in 2 games becomes something bigger, or if it's just those 3 assists and he has a scoreless week this week. But for Colorado, they're playing really, really well. And there's no one part of their game that I look at and say, well, that's going to do them in. I would have said the goaltending last week, but yeah, Varlamov has been fantastic in 5 of 6, and Grubauer was in the other one, and he was pretty good too. So it's been a good run for Colorado, and the one loss they got in that 6 was against St. Louis, another team that's playing very, very well in the Central. Number 15, moving up 2 spots from last week, Chicago. So the Hawks are an interesting team. A couple months ago, we're kind of leaving them for dead. Yeah, they're done. They're finished. They're done. Honestly, they look disinterested. The funny thing is, their defense still is shoddy, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that. They lost a game against the Colorado Avalanche this week, which will have Colorado fans saying, why is Chicago ahead of us in the power rankings? My answer would be, you went up 10 spots. Chicago only went up 2. But Chicago, Colorado aside, Chicago is looking very strong and very, very dangerous offensively every night. So I have some serious fear when it comes to Chicago if they make the playoffs. The way that Dallas looks like they're going to back out. The way that Minnesota had been playing until the last couple of games. Yeah, I have major concerns there. Number 14. Same spot as last week. Washington. The Capitals are doing enough that they should make the playoffs. They aren't doing enough for me to believe that they're going to repeat. And that's the easiest way for me to put it. So for me with Washington, I want to see more before I'll say they're anywhere near what they were last year. I really think that Washington could go out in the first round this year. Not to mention they're not that far clear of Carolina and Pittsburgh that they can relax. So When I see them losing 5-2 to Buffalo, it makes it hard for me to reward them for other games they've won lately. They're just on the fence for me. I don't really have an idea of whether they're going to be a contender or they're not, because they can look great the one night and rough the next. Number 13, dropping one spot from last week, is Philly. Philly, I really think, is going to go with Elliott from here. And I think that's a statement on the fact that Hart's young more than who the better goalie is. It's going to be Carter Hart. But, Elliott's the veteran. He's unflappable. We can have our debate on whether or not he's a top 10 goaltender. I agree that he's not. But for Philadelphia right now, he is probably the most stable netminder, and a veteran presence as well that they're going to find. They didn't have it with Pickard. At no point this year has Neuwirth looked like he's going to be the guy. Stollers, young kid, he's gone to Edmonton. Talbot, I'm not sure why did they get Talbot? Why did they get Talbot? Like, he's nowhere. It's like they traded for Talbot and then he went to Fiji where Quick and Campbell were earlier this year. Number 12, moving up one spot from last week, Nashville. Nashville would have moved up more, but that 5-0 loss to Colorado brought them down from where they were. I believe they were 11th coming into today. They were either 10th or 11th at one point this week. I remember them being at least 10th once this week. But it's been another rough go for Nashville, and I put them in kind of the same category as Washington, right? Which team are you going to get from one night to the next? You need that consistency. I don't know that I see it with them. Number 11, actually dropping one spot from last week, is Columbus. Now, before Columbus fans get mad, this is not a reflection on Columbus. There is one team that jumped 3 teams this week. And so Columbus falls back to 11th, not because they're not playing well, but because that team jumped them. Number 10, dropping one spot from last week, Winnipeg. Now, Winnipeg would have dropped more than that if not for the win against Vegas. If they'd lost against Vegas, we might see them as low as 12th. The win against Vegas gave me at least a little bit more faith in them. Kind of, sort of. I want to see more of goal-scoring Laine. Now, because he had 2 in his last game, that means he should have like 8 in the next one, right? Because he scores in bunches. But, for Winnipeg, they dropped one spot. Because, again, there's a team that's playing pretty darn well right now. Number 9, the Montreal Canadiens, who dropped one spot from last week. So Montreal drops the spot, and they can't be happy about how that Toronto game ended. But I still think Montreal's playing some pretty good hockey. I still think they're going to make the playoffs, although they're only 1 point above the playoff line now. So next week we could see them ending up dropping. But I still think they're playing well. I still look at Montreal and say, yeah, they'll still end up in there. And as a wild card, I don't know if I'd want to play Montreal in the first round. Carey Price, as much as I may joke about playoff Carey Price not being as good as regular season Carey Price, and it's because it's been out there as a narrative for a long time. Fair or not, it's been out there as a narrative for a long time. So, I really think Carey Price can steal a first round series. I think if it were Montreal against the Islanders, for instance, that would be one heck of a low-scoring, tight-checking, nail-biting series. Probably a lot of 2-1 games. Probably a lot of overtime, too. Number 8, the team that moved up 3 spots. St. Louis. The St. Louis Blues have won 12 of 13, and they're fantastic. And, the loss to Dallas notwithstanding, I just look at that and go, that's probably just a one-off. That's kind of how, with the way that I'm doing the power rankings now, it's changed. So before it would have been they lost 5-2 against Dallas. Well, they're getting dropped. And I would have dropped them that night. I really didn't. I looked at that game and I said, you know what? They've won 11 in a row. I'm not dropping them. And then the game they had against Boston today, which again, if you didn't get a chance to see it, that was a fantastic game. The Blues are playing playoff hockey now. Sometimes those teams that are playing playoff hockey for the last 2 months of the season don't have any gas left when they get into the playoffs. But, St. Louis knew they had to win now. And now for St. Louis, they have to be looking at Nashville and saying, we can catch them. They have to be looking at Winnipeg and saying the same thing. So I don't think St. Louis's run is over, and I think they're looking above. They're not really looking behind and worrying about anybody behind them. They really shouldn't be either because Dallas isn't getting any closer. Minnesota won their last couple of games, but they're not really getting any closer either. Number 7, dropping one spot from last week, Carolina. So again, this isn't about Carolina playing bad. On the contrary, there's one team that's gone on a nice winning streak here that for me has bumped them up the charts. So Carolina drops one spot from last week. Number 6, also dropping one spot from last week, is Toronto. Toronto had a solid week. Again, there's not a whole lot of movement in the top parts of this power rankings or any of my power rankings for the last little while. Because, again, when I look at it, I have a pretty good idea of who I think is playing the best hockey. Toronto is one of the most dangerous teams in the league. That is not going to change. Toronto scares me. And that's why when I talk about if Toronto played Boston in the first round, which is looking more and more like it's going to happen again, I really think Toronto's going to get their revenge after the last 2 efforts went Boston's way in 7. And it's not a self-deprecating thing. It's just realistically beating the same team over and over and over again becomes more and more of a challenge, unless you're Montreal eliminating Boston, in which case it seems to get easier if you look through history. Up until, late 80s, and then things kind of changed. But yeah, it seemed to get easier for Montreal at times. Anyways, number 5, dropping 2 spots from last week, the Islanders. Yes, they got the victory over the Vancouver Canucks. The Vancouver Canucks, however, are down at this point on the board, and they did lose that game to the Oilers. I know, Islander fans are upset because McDavid was still in the game. I agree. I don't have any disagreement with that, but it's a loss for the team. So for that reason, I dropped the Islanders down to 5. I still think they're one of the best teams in the league. They currently have 79 points. I don't see any way they don't make the playoffs, and I'd kind of be surprised if they don't end up finishing first in their division as well. Number 4, moving up 3 spots from last week, Boston. This has been a fun run for Boston. They've won 7 of 8. They lost their first game in 8 today in a shootout. They played a really solid game against St. Louis. And, there's so much to like with what's going on with Boston right now. And remember, they're doing this without Pasta. So they're going on this run. They're winning a lot of games without Pastrnak. You've got to think when Pastrnak returns, and he's getting close, that Boston can really maybe maintain that run. So this is that run that I didn't think they had in them this year. Apparently they did. Now, where they end up in the playoffs and how this ends up affecting them, I don't know. And we'll see where they end up in the overall standings and how hosed they are with who they get in the first round. Because if they were in the Metro or the Pacific, or I don't get into that. The Bruins are locked into second at best. I know that. Number 3, dropping 1 spot from last week, San Jose. There are some troubling things with San Jose, and it's the best of times, the worst of times with Martin Jones. So you can look and go, well, he got a shutout, he played great, and then the next game, So that's where you're at with San Jose, and as I mentioned in my matinee review video today, I do wonder, are the San Jose Sharks going to be looking at making a move? Are San Jose going to be looking at making maybe a more major move than we might expect because of some of these lingering issues that are in their game? Yes, they're winning their share of games. Yes, they look like an excellent bet to finish. They're going to finish top 2 in their division. They could very well finish first. They could be number 1 in the West. But you need to go on a nice long Stanley Cup final, I would think at least, run. Anything less than the Stanley Cup final for San Jose, I would think would be a major disappointment. And if they get there, they'll be very disappointed if they don't win it again. So, and by again, I mean they were in there just a couple years ago, and of course they lost to the Penguins. And if they went in, 2016, so 3 years ago. It doesn't matter. So it's a few years ago. Anyways, I would think it'd be a major disappointment if they went back to the finals, and they weren't able to win it. Number 2, moving up 2 spots from last week, The Flames. Now, if I had told Flames fans a month ago, if I had said Mike Smith will be one of the linchpins to a major winning streak, I would have been told no. I would have been told to stop it. That's not right. You can't pick on Mike Smith like that, and telling a joke like that isn't fair. Okay, maybe not. However, Calgary's run has been in at least some part due to Mike Smith's play. The impressive thing with Calgary's run right now is it's not Gaudreau fueled. This is not just it's the first line. It's kind of been every line. So that depth scoring showing up, and ironically, it's when James Neal gets hurt. Who saw that coming? I didn't. So Calgary's been on a really nice run, which means number one is the most unsurprising number one team. Just horrifically unsurprising that they're number one. And, you know, I couldn't even make up a reason why Tampa's not number one. I'm starting to see a lot of posts online about how Tampa's really playing better than everybody by a large margin. And that's true. Tampa is a very long distance ahead of everybody else. And, you know, they'd have to lose 4 or 5 in a row right now for me to say, yeah, they're probably not the best team in the league anymore. And even then, at a 5-game losing streak, I would probably say, well, you have to expect them to have this fallback because look where they are in the standings. So I would still make the assertion that they're still probably the best team in the league. So there you go. My power rankings for this week. And I've got to make a change. Okay, so once again, the Detroit Red Wings, number one on the power rankings because their jerseys are top notch. Tampa's are derivative, so therefore they're down here, right down with Ottawa, who I think going back to this logo, I think that was a stroke of genius by Eugene Melnyk, and I was surprised that they just started wearing that in their last game, and they made no press announcement, and the press didn't ask them either because Ottawa's done. Florida, really honestly, you know, the comeback by Pavel Bure this week really surprised me. I didn't see that coming. Just like for Dallas, the comeback of Mike Modano and Neil Broughton surprised me. I think the fact that it's a clone of Mike Modano takes away from it a little bit, but not completely. Speaking of clones, Gretzky, they've got a Gretzky coach, and they've got a Gretzky on the ice. That's right, Wayne Gretzky will coach and play for Arizona. 2 clones of Gretzky have now reached the mature age of 19, and they're excited about this. They're excited about what it's going to bring to the team. Vancouver at 5. Now, them naming Messier as coach, GM, and president, it surprised me. I have to admit. But going on a 12-game winning streak, it's been fun to watch. Now, they were against Bantam teams, and they weren't in the NHL, but it's still a start. The Kings at 6, because they went back to that jersey, which I think that was the smart thing to do. So there you go. I'm just reminding you guys why I picked the top 6 that I did. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. This has been the final power rankings from this townhouse. Next up, it's going to be the first power rankings. Let's see, that would be on March 2nd. Should be on the new set then. Fingers crossed. Thank you guys so much for all your support, helping me get here 76,000. Thank you very much. Looking forward to thousands more. I'll talk to you again soon.